Hi everyone, it's Sam from the Danger Planet here, and today I'm bringing you the first in a brand new series of videos. We're calling this Malifaux-Model-Mayhem, and in this series we're going to be talking about one specific model that's key to one of our favorite crews and go over the way the model functions, the role it plays, and some cool tips and tricks. Hope you enjoy this series, and today we're going to be starting off with a new model that's key to one of my favorite crews in the whole game, Jebediah. Tricksy and Big Hat keywords. So, Jebediah is one of the two new models that Tricksy and Big Hat got in Ashes of Malifaux. And I'm mostly a Tricksy player, so I'll be talking about this more in the context of Tricksy, but I will be sure to tell some details of how he works in Big Hat. So we'll start just by going over Jebediah at a high level. Basically, he is an inventor who rides on a mechanical pork chop. And he, of course, invents hats, because that's why Summer keeps him around. But he puts a little extra spice in them, what you might call a hatling gun. So we're not going to go into every single ability and rule on his card, but what Jebediah basically is an upgunned bushwhacker. He has the same scamper rule they have. He has the same pit traps rule they have, which both makes him immune to them and lets you get a pit trap anywhere on the board at the start of the game. He also has, like the bushwhackers, a 0-inch melee attack and a long-range gun. But that's where the similarities end, basically. Jebediah is not stealthy, but he does have armor +2, which is pretty good. Armor is not as reliable defensive tech as it once was in this game. There are many things with armor piercing, and his defensive stats are not good. So this is a guy who you really can't dangle out. Now, there are some enemies that just didn't bring armor piercing, but I actually think Jebediah is so good and is going to show up so much, and Tricksy has so many other armored things that it's reasonable to expect that in Tricksy your opponent will bring some armor piercing. Maybe not in Big Hat, because he's, I think, the only armored model in the keyword, but you never know. He also has Demise, I'm done with this, which is kind of a cute little bonus. It's not really a thing. He has Bayou 2 card, which again, not super reliable. It's kind of a no shit button. But what Jebediah mostly is a gun. He has a Gatling gun, which is very similar to many of the other types of guns we've seen. I think it's the same gun Melissa Core has and Fuhatsu has. Jebediah's gun is solid. It is a range 12, 246. Now that damage track really wants focus, but fortunately he's in a keyword, two keywords really, that can hand out focus pretty easily. He's got Ride With Me, and this is where we're going to start talking about his tricks. Now, one thing I've seen some people talk about is giving him a ghillie suit so that he can use Ride With Me on Ma Tucket. I have to tell you, I really don't like doing that myself. I think that Ma Tucket wants to be close to the action, and Jebediah really doesn't. So, you don't want to put him at danger. It also makes him 10 stones, which is a lot. And you have lots of things in a well-built Tricksy crew that can push Ma Tucket around. You don't really need another one. But Jebediah does, you do want to benefit from this Ride With Me, and I think typically you'll be giving rides to Big Brain Bryn. Bryn really does need to be fairly close to the action to do things. He's got a bunch of 6-inch range abilities, and he doesn't really want to take walk actions because the AP on his card are so good. Sober Up is great, Calculate the Possibilities is great, even his Quick Wit, stat 7 with a Surge trigger is great. So letting you ferry Big Brain Bryn around is just icing on the cake. But in order to understand Jebediah's role in the keyword, you really need to understand sort of what the Tricksy keyword is trying to do. Now, the Tricksy keyword features one really powerful melee attacker, and then a bunch of pretty good guns. I like Bushwhacker's guns a lot. 14-inch range, ignores cover, crit strike. Clever Ruse is another really good trigger. You've got, Survivors. Their weak 1 is kind of a bummer, but you can stack focus pretty easily with this crew, and Severe 5 on a fairly cheap, very durable model is pretty strong. But a lot of these guns are stat 5, and so the key mechanic, the core play loop in Tricksy, is injured stacking. Now, injured stacking is one of the most degenerate gameplay loops in the game. What I mean by that is, once you get 1 injured on you, it's really hard to avoid getting the second. And once you have two, it's almost impossible to avoid getting the third. And it just compounds on itself. 3 injured, 4 injured. There's no cap to how high injured can stack. It can reduce your stats to 1. Now, it cannot bring defense or willpower to 0, just because the way the Malifaux rules work. But it kind of doesn't matter. If you're stat 1, everything's hitting you. So how does Jebediah help with that? Well, a lot of the things in Tricksy that stack injured, it's mostly movement effects. There aren't that many attacks that just inflict injured. Instead, you're generally going to be pushing someone into a pit trap. You're going to be, and whether you're doing that with lure, or knock aside, or clever ruse, or any of those abilities, drop down a hole. You have lots of different ways to do that, but most of those abilities are stat 5. Horrible Haulerin is stat 5. The Bushwhacker's gun with clever ruse is stat 5. Tricksy Bell's lure is stat 6. Mawtucket's attack with knock aside is stat 6, not 7. So you have some options, but largely it's stat 5 attacks, which is a little challenging when you've got people like Bellaventine here, who's defense 6. So one of the things that people who play Mob will often say is that the first injured is the hardest to get on. And what Jebediah is really good at is getting that first injured. And the way he does it is scoot and boot. Now, that is the key action on his card, so it's worth talking about a little bit. Scoot and boot is a once per turn action. It's a range 6 tactical action. You need to flip a 6 or higher to make it go off. You target a marker, and what you do is you push Jebediah into base contact with the marker, then push the marker up to 3 inches in any direction. And when you push a hazardous marker through an enemy, it triggers the hazardous effect, which means you can apply that first injured by simply flipping a 6 or higher on a tactical action, and your opponent has no opposed flip and no ability to avoid it. So you can get that first injured uninteractively, and you've never really been able to do that before with this crew, or at least not easily. But now you can pretty easily, as long as somebody is anywhere close to you, you can get that first injured. And when I say anywhere close to you, I'm going to show you a bit of what I mean. So Jebediah starts off dropping a pit trap anywhere on the board, which, just to say generally, is very strong. Tricksy crews like to start with some pit traps on the enemy side of the board because it immediately lets you threaten, drop down a hole, and clever ruse. It messes with your opponent's unpack. But let's say we don't get to benefit from the pit trap on the other side of the board. Jebediah doesn't have dig trap or create trap, which is the rule that makes pit traps. Instead, he creates it using a trigger on his ride with me. I want to point out that this is probably the weak point of this model, that it really wants to hit its triggers on its tactical actions, and it's not a henchman, so it can't stone for them. However, Mawtucket's crews draw a lot of cards, so you will pretty easily be able to get them if you need. So anyways, Ride With Me, classic ability, everyone knows it, it's a 5-inch push, and Jebediah's Ride With Me has the hidden trap trigger, which creates a pit trap anywhere within pulse 2 of the model. So let's take a look at the range, right? We're going to start with Jebediah, and he's going to use Ride With Me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then, lucky Jebby, he hit his trigger, and so he gets to create a pit trap. That pit trap is 2 inches away from him, and remember, it's the back edge, so it's 2 inches plus its base width. So now we're 7 inches plus base width, call it 8.5 inches up, is where the pit trap is. But we're not done. Now Jebediah is going to target the pit trap he just made with Scoot and Boot. So let's say he gets it. He gets to push into base contact with it. And remember, you don't have to push into, just here, touching it. You can push past it. And you can push all the way past it to the very tip. So you see Jebediah just got the equivalent of 2 inches plus this 50mm base width, plus his 40mm base width, which is about 5 inches of movement. And that was with a pit trap he had dropped within 2. So imagine, if the pit trap was farther out, if you were, have if you have a bushwhacker, you could dig a pit trap exactly 11 inches away from Jeb. So we're going to put him here. We're going to put this little pit trap up here. And then we're going to say, Ride With Me, 5 inches. And then Scoot and Boot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and a bit. Notice we just basically went 9.5 inches using his bonus action and Scoot and Boot. And then this pit trap gets to itself get pushed 3 inches. Boop. So the maneuverability on Jebediah is truly extreme. But going back to where we began, say Jeb did his ride with me. Like we said, 1, 2, 3, or we'll start him farther back, I guess. Jeb went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He dropped a pit trap here. He then said, okay, I'm going to scoot and boot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, roughly, 5.5 maybe, to get to the far side of it. And then we push this thing 3 inches. And so Bellaventine Thorpe, who started off, let's say, 10 inches away from Jebediah, thinking she was totally safe, suddenly has a pit trap in her face. And he has an AP left. So now he can either shoot her with a Gatling gun, which is classic, it's a 2.46, or if he really wants, he can charge her. His attack is a little bit lower stat here. He's stat 5, so effectively stat 6 because she's already injured. But if he has a mask trigger, he can just charge at a slight angle and boop, push her into the pit trap with the Clever Ruse trigger, effectively making his attack a 3, 4, 5 that also inflicts a second injured. And he can even flip himself past her, right there. So, and I want to point out also the order in which these things happen. You do the place first, then you do Clever Ruse. So you can charge Bellaventine, hit her, flip past her, and then push her. It would be 3, it's 1.5 because it's severe terrain, into the pit trap and basically say, later, sucker. There's a lot of really cool stuff you can do with Jebediah. But mostly what he's there to do is just set up those pit traps, push them into people, get that injured stacked. Now, if you want to hold him farther back, especially if you have things like Soulstone Miners and Bushwhackers that are up here on the front line doing the pushing, it's perfectly serviceable for him to just sit there and take shots. Once you push someone into pit traps in a Tricksy crew and you reduce their defense and their willpower a bit, you do need something to actually finish them off. Bushwhacker guns are popular for this, Survivors if you hired them, Soulstone Miners, but Jebediah's got that fat, juicy, severe 6. And more than that, he's got Ricochet on his gun. So if you can get to a straight flip or even a positive twist to damage, and a positive twist to damage is not unusual once you've started inflicting several injured. I mean, when you're attacking at effectively stat 7 or stat 8, you can get pretty massive numbers. So if it's already a focus shot. Anyways, you get a ricochet, you can do 6 to the target, 4 to somebody else, 10 damage off a single attack. I mean, it sounds like, Magical Christmas Land, the term for when everything goes right, which it never does in a game of Malifaux, but it's, more likely than you'd think. Now, I also want to talk about the haberdashers quickly. Scoot and boot, pushing pit traps through people, is obviously the most powerful use of it, and often you want to leave the pit trap there. So scoot and boot is something that in Tricksy, I think that sometimes I'll summon a haberdasher. I think I'll almost always summon one turn 1, except maybe on wedge deployment. But on later turns, there is a real cost to summoning them, because when you summon a haberdasher, it removes the pit trap. So I would say when I'm playing in a Tricksy crew, especially if I used a pit trap for scoot and boot, I have to really have something I'm specifically planning to do with these haberdashers. Because if I don't have something I'm specifically planning to do with them, I'm just sort of creating a guy because I want to have an extra guy. That's sometimes going to be worse than just leaving the pit trap where it is. Now that said, it's not hard to think of situations where you'll have something to do with haberdashers. They're extremely strong. Just the fact that they have Scuttle means they can, unlike most summons, they can remove a scheme marker the turn they come into play. Because Scuttle is just a, it's a bonus action that just says remove a marker within 2 inches. So right there, they can counter scheme the turn they arrive, which most summons can't do. And while doing it, they can even get, bonus movement, and it's even their bonus action, so they have 2 AP left. They're very strong. They can also turn into scheme markers, which is very funny. Generally, because they can interact, they're not insignificant. I think generally the time you'll do that is if you're trying to score in snare. You'll have a haberdasher, scuttle up to somebody, interact to drop a scheme marker next to them, then use the hat trick action to drop another scheme marker. Now, scuttle, I think, actually means you will very rarely even need to do that. You can just interact, scuttle to push outside of 4 inches, and then interact again, but you'll have that option. Haberdashers are very, very good. They are disguised, which is kind of bizarre because it just means that some melee crews will just randomly have an enormous amount of difficulty removing your like crappy, terrible 3-stone summons. They also have 3 health, which means people can't just target them with a gun that has a weak 2 and then just be like, all I need to do is hit you because if I hit you, you instantly die. And they're defense 5, which is not good, but it's not like crappy defense 4 like a Bayou Gremlin. These guys have some actual staying power. It's going to occasionally take effort to remove them. So they have a lot of uses. I think the number one use that you're going to have for Haberdashers is scuttling around. Their attacks are cute. Fashion Sense is a great name for an attack. I think it's very rare that you're going to be making attacks with a Haberdasher. Mostly they're going to be scheming and counter scheming. But the ability to go walk, pick up a scheme marker within 2 inches, no flipping, no, opposed duels, just it happens, is really strong. So I think that you will pretty often be using these guys either to, occupy space, maybe block up a lane or engage someone in combat, or just create or remove scheme markers. I also do want to remind you that they do come in slow, but that still means they can travel up to 10 inches the turn they arrive. So Haberdashers are pretty great. Scoot and Boot, creating them, obviously an extremely strong ability. You are going to be fighting for Rams a little bit. Tricksy crews really like Rams for their initiative flip, and Ma has that Ram trigger on her horrible Holoran to pulse out focus. So just be aware that you're fighting for those a little bit, and you're not necessarily going to get them all the time. And of course, you can't stone for them. So just it's something to keep in mind. It's probably worth saving a Ram for this because Ma can stone, but it's just it's not a freebie. The other thing to think about, Scoot and Boot. Now, the obvious play with Scoot and Boot is to push markers around, and as we've seen already, you can either use it to get enormous mobility, or you can use it to create a nice little self-contained injured loop. It doesn't require anything from anyone else. You make your own pit trap, you push it. But it doesn't say once per turn target a pit trap marker. It says once per turn target a marker. It's any kind of marker. So scheme markers, kind of the most obvious one. You can push them 3 inches, which is very good at denying scoring, and you can also just remove them entirely and turn them into a Haberdasher. Pylon markers you can get rid of. Pyre markers. Now remember, if you move into a piece of hazardous terrain with Scoot and Boot, and it's not pit traps, so it's not a type that you ignore, you will take the hazardous effect, but maybe it's worth it. But just the ability to get rid of any kind of marker, doesn't matter what, if it's within 6 inches of you, you can both push it away and just get rid of it entirely. Your opponent can't interact. Very, very strong. There will be times when you wish you weren't moving, but I think Jebediah is pretty mobile, as we've seen. And of course, if it's real push comes to shove, you can move up to it, and then you can ride with me to get back out, so you can shoot with your gun. I want to talk about him a little bit in Big Hat as well. So Big Hat is focusing on a different set of tools. The pit trap synergy is still nice, although you should remember that your own Big Hat models don't ignore the pit trap the way a lot of Tricksy models do, so you really do have to be careful with how you place it. Big Hat models, however, really care about scheme markers, and that's where the Haberdashers come in, because they can be treated as scheme markers. So you can do things like, remove a Haberdasher, killing it in order to, summon a Bayou Gremlin with Summer 2. Or you can, use a Haberdasher's ability to count as a scheme marker to maybe pull a Bayou Smuggler around, or rather pull the Haberdasher around when the Bayou Smuggler moves. There's a few different sort of little plays like that. You can target them with break stuff, which will kill your Haberdasher, but a lot of your models with break stuff have a good trigger. So, for example, if you have a 5 or more of Tomes, Georgie and Olaf can just cash in a Haberdasher for a focus. I think the biggest use for Haberdashers in Big Hat, though, is for Old Cranky. Now, people who have played against Big Hat know that Old Cranky has that incredibly powerful not quite an aura, it's just a ranged ability that lets you basically pawn attacks off on cheap Big Hat minions. And Haberdashers are cheap Big Hat minions, and they're really easy to summon. So Jebediah is actually pretty safe in Big Hat in a way that he isn't in Tricksy, because he can just dupe around the board, summoning Haberdashers and keeping them close to him. And then if anyone shoots him, just pawning the attack off on the Haberdasher. So there's a lot of like cool little plays you can do in Big Hat because of those Haberdashers. You can even carry one Haberdasher around with you with Ride with Me, just to have your little bodyguard staying near you all the time. Or you can carry Old Cranky. Although Old Cranky has that weird "Give me a hand, kid" ability where he can kind of teleport himself around, so he doesn't necessarily need the help. Other than that, Big Hat is a very strong gun line. You've got those summons that have Hunting Partner. You've got a variety of strong guns, and he slots right into there next to like Georgie and Olaf, who has a pretty good gun. Summer 1 has an obviously incredible gun. So, given that it's a crew that does a lot of its killing at range, with the exception of Lenny, obviously, Jebediah fits in there. So I really like Jebediah. He does a lot. He's very mobile, as we've seen. He summons these models. His role in the crew is very much the enabler. He enables Tricksy, as we've said, by creating these pit traps and pushing them through people without any interaction to start off the injured chain. And he also, and this is I think what really sets him apart from other models, he's not just an enabler, but when you already have an enabler, like when you have some other model that has already succeeded in starting the injured chain, Jebediah is really good at taking advantage of it with his 246 gun. So he really functions either at the beginning of your activation chain, setting up that first pit trap and pushing it through the target, or at the end of your chain after you've already got some injured on the target and you just need something with some oomph to finish it off. And I think that's really the mark of a flexible model, and it's why I'm really so excited to play with Jebediah. As for Big Hat, I think that he slots into any kind of gun line. He summons minions. He enables a lot of your scheme marker shenanigans. And I also think that in Big Hat, you're less likely to see people take armor piercing. Although again, he's so good, he may just show up in every single Big Hat list, and now your opponent has to take armor piercing. How to fit him in a list is something you are going to have to think about. 8 stones is not nothing. He turns on in your face for your opponent, which is a concern. I often try to build these in your face lists that don't have anything cost 8 or more, just to turn the scheme off for your opponent entirely. Jebediah makes that impossible. But in a list, I generally think he's a straight upgrade on a lot of pre-existing ranged minions. I think, for example, I would take him over the first Bushwhacker most of the time. Maybe not all the time, because sometimes you really want that first Bushwhacker to be out there on the line, using From the Shadows and its 14-inch gun with Grid Strike to just take a focus shot and blow up someone's totem on the top of turn 1. But other than that, I think that he replaces the second Bushwhacker pretty easily. He's a little more pricey, but you can maybe drop an upgrade or find the space some other way. I also think that he pairs so well with Big Brain Bryn and with some of these other models that it's really hard to justify not taking him if you're already taking Bryn. Just being able to give Bryn a ride is such a huge deal. Bryn gives him a focus, which is really strong on his 246 gun. Bryn can heal him. Sparks can heal him because he is technically a construct. So you've got all these synergies that make it really attractive to take Jebediah with the models you already want to be taking. I think it's very rare that I'll build a Tricksy list that doesn't have them. Big Hat, I think it's less essential, but he's very good in Big Hat, so I can see myself taking him a lot of the time. So that's our Jebediah episode. I hope this was informative for you. He's a great model. He's, I think, the strongest model Bayou got in this book. It might even be a little too strong, but I guess we'll have to just see how he plays out. He's a lot of fun. He really enables some messed up game plans, and I think your opponent is just going to be biting their hat in frustration as they watch your pit traps just go slip and sliding right through their models and reducing their defense and willpower to nothing. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. We're going to be continuing to do episodes of Malifaux-Model-Mayhem, where we talk about models that are really key and central to a crew and how they function and what they do. So if there's a specific model you'd like us to cover, please let us know in the comments. Like this video, please, if it was enjoyable to you, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more great Malifaux content. And in the description of this video, there'll be a link to our Discord. So feel free to join our Discord. We talk about Malifaux, we talk about other games, we talk about Jebediah, and we just talk about all the stuff that we love doing. So till next time, thanks for stopping by the Danger Planet.